Early autumn always makes my work feel sharper. I'm 43, hybrid compliance, the kind of job that turns small inconsistencies into long afternoons. My wife and our daughter were spending 5 days at her parents' place, and I stayed behind to close out quarterly reporting. The cul-de-sac was evenly spaced and well-kept, driveway motion lights, trimmed lawns, the usual suburban symmetry. My evenings were routine. Dishes by 8:30, thermostat down to 68, and the security system armed before 10. The refrigerator's steady hum carried through the kitchen like a metronome. If you prefer realistic, grounded accounts like this, subscribe for more. I didn't feel lonely exactly. More like the house had more edges when it was quiet, each room defined by what you could hear and what you couldn't. I moved through the same sequence every night without thinking, and that predictability usually calmed me. I stayed home because deadlines don't travel well. There were flagged vendor contracts stacked in my queue, missing signatures, inconsistent dates, billing notes that didn't match the original scope. I set my laptop on the dining table where I could glance up at the front window without getting up. It was practical, not paranoid. I liked knowing what the street looked like while I worked. The only mild annoyance was neighborhood teenagers cutting across lawns at night, using the cul-de-sac as a shortcut. It happened just often enough to be a pattern, not often enough to be worth confronting. Dry leaves would skitter across the pavement when a car passed, and I'd look up, then go back to the screen. The porch light ran on an automatic timer set for 10:05 p.m., a small piece of order I rarely questioned. The first time I noticed it, it didn't feel like anything. Around 10:20 p.m., the porch light went off and then came back on. Not a flicker, an actual drop to darkness, brief enough that I might have missed it if I hadn't looked up at that exact moment. My first thought was a timer glitch or a bulb that was starting to fail. I checked the security app out of habit. No alerts, no motion triggers, nothing that suggested anyone had stepped onto the porch or into the driveway. I reset the timer and moved on, hearing the faint relay click inside the wall when it accepted the change. The bulb had been replaced 3 weeks earlier, a 60W LED. I told myself electronics sometimes behaved like that and went back to my contracts. The next night it happened again. Same time. The porch light dropped out for exactly 7 seconds and returned as if nothing had changed. I didn't count at first. I used the kitchen clock without thinking, then did it again with the timer on my phone the following night. 7 seconds, clean and consistent, always at 10:20. It started to feel less like failure and more like an interval. Security logs showed no outages, no arming interruptions, no tampering. I checked the breaker panel anyway. Nothing loose, no warm switches, no tripped circuits. On the third night, I noticed something else. The driveway motion light across the street flickered at the same moment. A brief bright stutter, then steady again. If you enjoy slow burn, realistic horror, leave a like. After that, I began sitting in darkness before 10:20, turning off my interior lights so the window wouldn't reflect my own room back at me. There's a particular hollow quiet that settles when neighborhood HVAC units cycle down, like the air itself has paused to listen. At 10:20 and 14 seconds p.m., the porch light dropped. On the fourth night, I didn't watch from the table. I stood beside the front window, close enough to feel the cooler draft from the glass, far enough back that I wasn't silhouetted. All the lights inside were off. I could hear my breathing more than I liked in the foyer, a steady rhythm that didn't match the stillness outside. At 10 hours 20 minutes and 14 seconds, the porch light went dark. In that brief absence, I didn't see a person. I saw the effect of one, movement as displacement, a shifting of shadow at the edge of the driveway where the mailbox cast a narrow strip of black toward the curb. It was subtle, but it had weight. When the light returned, the driveway looked normal again. No figure, no obvious motion. That was the moment the thought arrived fully formed. The darkness might be timed on purpose. The fifth night, I disabled the porch timer entirely. I didn't want the light participating in whatever this was. I left it off before 10:20 and watched from the upstairs bedroom window instead, where I had a wider angle on the garage and the side yard. The street was quiet enough that a distant engine on the main road sounded like weather. At 10 hours 20 minutes and 14 seconds, the motion light across the street flared bright, as if something had crossed it close and fast. For a second, the sudden light carved everything into edges, driveways, hedges, the sheen of car roofs. In that illumination, I saw a human outline low to the ground near my garage door. Not standing, crouched, compact, like someone trying to stay beneath the line of windows. The figure froze. There was a pause long enough for my mind to offer explanations and reject them. Then the outline moved toward the side yard when my porch light didn't come on the way it normally would. I stayed still, resisting the urge to step into a window and make myself known. A few minutes later, a faint metallic sound came from the side gate, soft, controlled, like a latch being tested. I triggered my car alarm remotely. The chirp tore through the quiet, sharp and violent in the still air. The motion stopped immediately. Neighboring lights flicked on in sequence, and when I looked back, there was no one visible, just my side gate and a latch with a shallow dent I hadn't noticed before. I called the non-emergency line and reported what I'd seen as plainly as I could. Waiting made time feel thicker. When an officer arrived, his flashlight moved methodically along the fence line and across the side yard, light brushing over wood grain and shrub leaves with the same indifferent precision I used at work. He found no footprints on the dry pavement, no clear sign of forced entry. The gate latch held. The garage door showed no fresh pry marks. The security system had recorded nothing beyond my own alarm trigger. I wrote the incident report number on a yellow sticky note and pressed it to the edge of my laptop, as if having it visible made the night more factual. The next day I installed a temporary floodlight aimed at the garage and side yard. The security company ran diagnostics and found no breach. I kept telling myself it had been an attempted theft interrupted by unpredictability, by noise, by timing that didn't go the way someone expected. A few evenings later, with the house occupied again by routine, I did something I hadn't wanted to do. I reviewed older security footage. The laptop fan spun while I scrubbed through silent clips that looked like nothing. Driveway, porch, a quiet street, leaves moving when cars passed. I found 2 brief porch light outages from the previous month while my family was home. I hadn't noticed them then, because I wasn't watching the window at 10:20. Each outage lasted exactly 7 seconds. No visible figure, no motion alerts, just a clean absence of light, and then its return, stamped with a tidy cluster of time. 10 hours 20 minutes and 14 seconds to 10 hours 20 minutes and 21 seconds. What bothered me wasn't that I'd missed it. It was realizing the outage would only matter to someone waiting for darkness, and that someone might have been waiting while my wife and daughter were inside, and none of us had known to look. When my family came back, the house filled in around them, the familiar friction of morning schedules, the sound of footsteps that didn't make me pause. I left the porch timer disabled. The floodlight stayed. Nothing further happened. No more 7-second gaps, no synchronized flicker across the street, no crouched outline near the garage. Still, I check the clock most nights without meaning to. I'll be rinsing a mug or locking the back door, and my eyes drift to a digital display. When it reads 10:20, I feel my attention sharpen, not with fear, but with a quiet readiness I can't explain away. What unsettles me isn't seeing someone. It's the precision of the darkness, and the way 10 hours 20 minutes and 14 seconds still glows on the microwave clock like it's keeping an appointment. If you know someone who appreciates grounded horror told plainly, share this with them and subscribe for the next account.
Midwinter has a way of compressing sound. I'm 45, recently transitioned into full remote financial consulting after 2 decades in an office tower. My house is a ranch-style place at the edge of a wooded subdivision, the last row before a narrow tree line that separates us from another development. My wife was overseas for 2 weeks visiting family, and I stayed behind for client obligations I couldn't reschedule. Evenings were structured, fireplace on low, spreadsheets open, doors locked by 9:30. Wind brushed lightly against the rear sliding glass door, a steady, almost polite pressure. The back patio motion camera, labeled Cam 3, watched the yard without comment. If you appreciate realistic accounts told plainly, subscribe for more. Alone, the house didn't feel threatening. It felt precise. Year-end audits require uninterrupted focus, especially when clients are anxious about discrepancies. I worked late in my home office facing the backyard, where the tree line formed a dark, even boundary beyond the fence. The property didn't feel isolated, but it wasn't fully connected either. Sound from neighboring houses thinned out after 10. There had been mild Wi-Fi interference lately, too many routers clustered in close range, so the camera feed occasionally lagged. I'd see the buffering icon spin at 11:42 p.m., then the image would refresh a second behind real time. The delay was subtle, just enough to create a faint dissonance between movement and confirmation. I adjusted channels and reset the router more out of habit than concern. The first irregularity was almost forgettable. Reviewing backyard footage one night, I noticed Cam 3 had shifted slightly to the left. The fence line appeared closer to the right edge of the frame than usual. I assumed wind had caught it or that the bracket had loosened in the cold. The next morning I stepped outside. Hard frost crunched under my boots as I walked to the patio. The mount felt solid. I tightened the screws with a 3/16 hex key anyway, more to reassure myself than out of necessity. The angle looked correct again. I told myself the lagging feed had probably distorted my perception. Digital artifacts can exaggerate small changes. Over the next several nights, the angle shifted again. Always subtly, always overnight. I began checking the feed first thing each morning before coffee, and each time the frame crept slightly left. There were no motion alerts, no notifications suggesting tampering, just a slow, incremental drift. I marked a reference point on the fence, a knot in one of the posts, and compared its position on screen day after day. The shift measured roughly 2 inches per night in visual alignment. Small enough to miss casually, consistent enough to be intentional. The camera now aimed closer to the sliding glass door than the tree line. I stood outside in the cold and listened to the soft electric hum from the housing, steady and indifferent. If you prefer slow burn, realistic tension, leave a like. The drift continued. I stopped assuming it was accidental. One night, I disabled the Wi-Fi entirely before bed. I wanted to remove the possibility of a digital glitch, to see whether the feed would appear altered in the morning after being offline. Snow fell lightly overnight, about an inch by sunrise. When I checked the camera the next day, the angle had changed again. Not slightly, dramatically. It now pointed directly toward the interior of my living room through the sliding glass door. The couch and coffee table were centered in frame. Outside, the snow lay smooth and undisturbed. No footprints crossed the yard. No compressed patches near the patio. The stillness of that untouched white surface felt conclusive. The adjustment hadn't been virtual. It had been physical. I stayed awake the following night. I turned off interior lights and left only the faint glow of the fireplace embers. From the hallway, I could see the sliding glass door without being reflected in it. The yard beyond was a flat expanse of pale snow. At 2:13 a.m., a faint shadow moved across the fence line. Not a person fully visible, just a dim interruption of shape against white. I focused on the camera feed open on my phone. Slowly, almost delicately, the frame began to tilt. There was no abrupt jerk, just a gradual, controlled pressure. The faint scrape of plastic against brick reached me through the glass. At the edge of the frame, I saw gloved fingers, dark, precise, adjusting the housing. The camera tilted downward, then up, scanning the interior deliberately. I remained motionless in the hallway, resisting the instinct to step back. The movement stopped abruptly when my interior lights, set on a timer for 2:15 as a deterrent, flicked on. The yard brightened. The shadow withdrew beyond the fence line. I waited a full minute before stepping outside. No one was visible. The snow remained smooth except for a shallow indentation near the patio wall, too indistinct to define. The camera housing felt warm beneath my fingers despite the freezing air. The 2:13 a.m. timestamp burned into the footage like a signature. I called the police in the morning. An officer walked the perimeter, boots compressing snow in deliberate lines that revealed nothing beyond his own tracks. No clear footprints, no damaged fence boards, no sign of forced entry. A report was filed. The case number sat on a business card now tucked into my desk drawer. I removed Cam 3 that afternoon, unscrewing it from the brick entirely. The empty bracket remained. I installed interior blinds and kept them closed at night, regardless of how confined it made the room feel. The rational explanation was straightforward. Someone scouting for a burglary, testing sight lines, learning the schedule of interior lighting. It aligned with crime patterns. It required no speculation. Still, I reviewed older footage. The silence of archived video is unnerving, movement without sound, time passing without texture. I realized the first subtle shift had occurred 6 days earlier than I initially thought. The camera had originally pointed toward the trees, not the house. The angle progression formed a slow arc from woods to window. Each night's adjustment was incremental, patient. No motion alerts were ever triggered, which meant the person stayed just outside detection zones. The date stamp from 9 nights prior showed the camera still aligned with the fence post knot. The pattern suggested testing. Calibration. Not impulse. My wife returned, and the house filled with familiar noise again. The backyard remained undisturbed. No further attempts were visible, no new marks in the snow, no movement along the fence. I never reinstalled an outdoor camera. I decided I preferred not knowing whether someone might adjust it again. What unsettles me isn't the attempt itself. It's the patience behind it, the idea of someone standing in the cold, night after night, turning a lens by inches until it faced directly into our living room. Sometimes, when the lights are off, I see the dark reflection of that room in the glass, and I notice the empty mounting bracket still fixed to the brick. If this account stayed with you, share it with someone who appreciates grounded horror, and subscribe for the next one. Late summer is when the house feels most mechanical. I'm 42, a systems engineer on rotating on-call nights, and I tend to think in cycles and intervals. Our split level sits near a main road, close enough that distant traffic becomes a kind of baseline noise. My partner was visiting family for a long weekend, and I stayed back because my on-call window couldn't move. I keep a strict sleep schedule between alerts, even when I'm alone. The central air cycles every 14 minutes, almost exactly, and I notice when it doesn't. The hallway thermostat stays at 69 degrees Fahrenheit, steady and predictable. If you value realistic, grounded accounts like this, subscribe for more. Alone, the predictability is what usually helps me rest. On-call shifts mean my laptop stays open beside the bed, lid angled, so I can see alerts without fully sitting up. My phone volume stays high in case a server drops or a process stalls. I deadbolt the front door every night and slide the chain lock across out of habit. It's brushed steel, mounted a little higher than average, and it gives a clean metallic sound when it settles into place. The house makes more noise at night. Expansion pops in the attic rafters, faint thuds in ductwork, things you'd ignore during the day but catalog when you're waiting for sleep. I don't mind it. Most sounds have explanations. I'm used to isolating variables. The first time I heard it, the clock read 12:37 a.m. The time stuck because I had just glanced at my lock screen before turning over. A soft metallic slide came from downstairs. Not loud, not violent, just a brief, controlled movement of metal against metal. I assumed it was HVAC duct contraction. The air had just cycled off. The laptop fan idled quietly beside me, a low steady hum that usually masks smaller sounds. I waited for it to repeat. It didn't. No alerts from the security system. No motion notifications. I told myself houses breathe at night, especially in late summer when the temperature shifts quickly. The following night, at 12:37, I heard it again. The same metallic slide, this time followed by a faint click. It sounded deliberate, but not forceful. I went downstairs, turned on the foyer light, and checked the front entry. The door was closed, deadbolt engaged, chain in place. Nothing disturbed. On the third night, I decided to stay awake intentionally. I sat on the edge of the bed with the lights off and waited. The house felt hollow in that posture, the foyer below amplifying small echoes. At exactly 12:37, the sound came again, clearer now, from the direction of the front door. The security system remained silent. That's when I realized the chain lock can slide slightly if the door flexes under pressure. The bracket is mounted just loose enough that a gentle push from outside might shift it without triggering a sensor. If you appreciate slow burn, realistic tension, leave a like. I didn't sleep much after that. On the fourth night, I stood halfway down the stairs before 12:37. I didn't turn on any lights. I wanted my eyes adjusted. The foyer below was dim, lit only by the ambient glow from the street filtering through frosted glass. At 12:37 precisely, the chain moved. Slowly. Not a rattle. Not a strike. A measured slide, as if someone were testing how far it would go. The door itself didn't open. The deadbolt held, but the chain stretched outward, tightening toward its limit. I froze instead of announcing myself. My pulse felt loud in my ears, steady but heavy. The chain extended to its full 2-inch allowance and stopped. Whoever was on the other side wasn't pushing hard, just enough to feel resistance. The pressure increased slightly. I could see the door flex inward a fraction of an inch, subtle but visible along the frame. The chain tightened again, metal under tension. There was no rush, no sudden shove, just incremental force, patient and exploratory. I stepped sideways and reached for the wall panel near the stairs. Without speaking, I triggered the remote panic alarm. The exterior siren erupted instantly, sharp and mechanical, echoing between neighboring houses and reflecting off the split-level facades across the street. The pressure on the door released at once. The chain slackened and fell back against the bracket. Through the frosted glass, I saw a shadow retreat from the porch, an outline withdrawing rather than running. I didn't open the door. I stood still and listened to the siren cycle. Within minutes, patrol lights flashed across the front window. When officers checked the porch, it was empty. No pry marks on the door. No footprints on the dry concrete. The only visible change was the chain bracket itself. Slightly bent outward, one screw head faintly warped from strain. The siren's echo lingered longer than I expected. The officer suggested someone might have been testing occupancy, checking whether anyone was home before committing to more. It was presented as routine, almost procedural. I nodded because it made sense. I prefer explanations that fit existing models. The next day, I reinforced the door frame. I replaced the original screws with 3-inch security screws that anchored deeper into the stud. The drill vibrated through the wood, steady and practical. I also installed a doorbell camera with continuous recording rather than motion-only activation. Sleep was irregular for several nights after. I'd wake before 12:37 and wait for the air to cycle, listening for any metallic shift. The chain felt heavier when I slid it into place. When I reviewed the camera footage from the nights before installation, there was nothing. No visible approach. No figure stepping onto the porch. The chain slide occurred without any captured presence. After the camera went live, the porch remained empty at 12:37. The timestamp remained consistent in my memory. 12 hours, 37 minutes, and 2 seconds, the second the sound began. I scrubbed through silent footage of an empty porch illuminated by streetlight and wondered how long someone might have tested the door before I noticed. The pattern suggested repetition, not randomness. My partner returned Sunday evening. The house resumed its normal rhythm, conversation, footsteps, the subtle disorder of two people moving through shared space. The chain remains reinforced. No further incidents have occurred. Still, I wake at 12:37 occasionally without any alarm. The house is quiet except for the central air cycling on schedule. I listen for that soft metallic slide and hear nothing. What unsettles me isn't that someone tried the door. It's how gently they did it, the quiet weight of the door against its frame, and the slight outward bend still visible on the chain bracket if you know where to look. If this stayed with you, share it with someone who appreciates grounded horror, and subscribe for the next account.